Hello everyone, this is Serious Trivia. Welcome back to another episode of Theorycraft Thursday. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, Theorycraft Thursday is a weekly series of the upcoming collectible card game, Total War Elysium, where I'll be diving into certain gameplay topics or design topics, and this week, we're going to take a look at the current 11 generals in the game and rank them, because we're going to get a new general next week. So let's first take a look at what we have here. As you can see, we have 4 different factions. We have the 3 kingdoms, the Troy, the Vikings, and the Empire or French Republic. Actually, Empire is the whole time period. And clearly the one that's missing here is we're probably one shy from having a 3rd Viking general. So my best guess for next week's November update release with a new general is probably that we're going to get a new Viking general and hopefully some new Viking and medieval cards, as that is the one period that's currently lacking the most cards. And before we get that new general, I just want to rank the current state of the game. Now, this is obviously going to be a reflection of my experience with the game and my opinions of the decks, and probably a reflection of my playstyle. I tend to be more of an aggro player. I don't have the patience for a lot of the control decks. Now, control decks are fun when it works, but because aggro exists, sometimes you can't get too creative or else you'll just get killed by a aggro deck. So with that said, let's just jump into ranking these generals. We're going to be taking a more comprehensive view. We're not going to just say this deck is OP, because if that's the only deck that works on that general, then the general isn't very good. It's just that we have a OP card combo that could work well with the general. So we'll be taking a look at the general's own special effect and their own signature card. So coming in at number 11, last place here, we have Devol. Devol is the newest general to the game, and sadly he is the worst in my opinion. And that is mainly due to his very late game focus ability of giving +1/+1 to all allies on the line once you have 9 cards in hand. This is very hard to trigger. You are not going to have this activated until day 2 at the earliest, because you start out with 3 cards and each turn you draw 1. You take about 3 turns on each day. So you're going to be at day 2, if not 3, before you can build up a 9 card in hand. Now, of course, this can be sped up by certain cards that draw, but if you think about it, you can't really draw 2 cards when you spend 1 card unless you're playing Freshwater, or if you're playing something like Vineyard that can spawn additional cards into your hand. Those are all methods to speed this up, but even if you build the entire deck to speed this up, you're not going to get this on day 1. So effectively, you have no skills on day 1 and possibly day 2. And you also have no attack. Now, you are compensated by having 30 health, but having no attack is really bad. And then his signature card costs a bit too much, costs 2 to place a Palisade on your front line. Palisade are 1/2 structures that should cost 1 if you're just talking about a card value. So this card by itself is terrible value. Now, obviously, this is meant to combo with his special effect, as the Iron Defense card will respawn every turn, so you essentially get a free card play every turn to help build up your hand. And if you're playing Earthwork Battery, you can spawn additional artillery. Sadly, though, that is the only card that synergizes with spawning structure right now. So there is not much synergy for him. Now, obviously, Devol is doing quite well, probably, in the current meta, because he's an excellent candidate for the Camel strategy that uses supply train and new recruits, as he is an Empire General, so he has access to supply train, and due to his high health, he can survive until you can pull that combo off. That will definitely help his win rate, but that is probably the only viable deck on him, so I don't think he is very good in the game, thus he gets the 11th spot. And then moving on, we have Guthrum, who has been gutted in the latest patch. He was pretty strong in my opinion before this. The latest patch changed his hit and run to a 2-cost ability. Now, hit and run used to be 1 cost, gives a friendly unit +1 attack, but the unit has to be returned to your hand during each daybreak. So that was kind of a pro and con type of balance card, but it was getting abused because you could definitely have about 3 good turns to trade very well with your card, have them injured if they have high health, and then once it returns to your hand at daybreak, you can play it again. And you can even do this on cards with very good Herald abilities. You might play it right before Daybreak, have it trigger the Herald, and then you apply Hit and Run on them, and then it comes back to your hand the next turn for you to play it again. And Guthrum had a conversion ability that changes, so when he gets hit to last gasp, his Hit and Run changes to conversion, which is very similar to what Hit and Run does, except for it gives a shield in addition to +1 attack. So it's a stronger version of Hit and Run, which actually makes some late game control Guthrum deck very powerful as well, because you can drop to last gasp, then heal yourself up with a decamp, and then you have a more powerful version of your Hit and Run. And that is often the playstyle you probably have to lean into now, because Hit and Run costs 2, but conversion still costs 1. And having Hit and Run cost 2 pretty much guts your early game. You can't have efficient trades that you had before, and that's just really hurtful, because when you have a signature card, you depend on it quite a bit because it's always available in your hand every single turn, and having it increase in cost is going to hurt you throughout the game. Now, is Guthrum not playable? Probably not, but because of this nerf, I think he is on the lower tier. And then moving on, we have Donjoy. Now, on the surface, Donjoy looks quite similar to Devol because he's a 0 attack, 30 health general, but he has much more interesting mechanics. First off, during every Daybreak, he gives a supply cache for free. This is much better than having 9 cards in hand. As a matter of fact, if you combine the two, it will synergize quite well. But here, that's not his specialty. The specialty is build up a lot of cheap cards in hand and then use Persuasion, his signature card, which costs 1, to reduce a random card in your hand's cost by 2 this turn. And that allows for a lot of combos. And there is a lot of combo cards that synergize with this, whether you're playing the Repeating Crossbowmen, which can gain infinite number of actions depending on how many cards you played, or Yellow Turban cards, or Scribe combo to draw your deck with the supply caches that you gain during Daybreak, or you can play Daybreak combos that gives you more supply caches, and you can speed up all those combos curve by using Persuasion. So it's a pretty decent general with some cards to support the strategy, unlike Devol, which only has really one card that supports his playstyle in the Earthwork Battery. So I think Donjoy is okay with certain decks, but he's not as flexible. If you're not playing a super expensive deck that contains a lot of legendary cards or epic cards that depends on late game comboing after you survive the early game and heal up, he is pretty much useless. And he was very powerful early on when all the board clears were a lot cheaper. Board clears have obviously seen a lot of nerfs, whether it is no quarters or it's the Blot Out of the Sun plus regime change. All of those has been nerfed. Those were staples in the Donjoy deck we showcased a while back. It's still viable, it just costs a bit more now. So I think he's also on the lower end of the general tier list, and he's definitely deserving of his hard difficulty, as it does take some skill to play combo decks in the late game. Then moving on, in number 8, this is probably a very controversial spot, Napoleon. I know he is a fan favorite, or at least a player-based favorite. There are a lot of Napoleon decks out there, but I don't think Napoleon's very strong. So Napoleon's ability is that he starts out the game with a free foot artillery. It's a 1-2 range unit, short ranged, and he has the signature card of Logistics, which allows him to pay 2 supplies this turn for 1 supply next turn that can increase to 2 supplies if it's planned, meaning the card has spent a turn in your hand during the Daybreak, which prevents you from playing the card the turn before the Daybreak, by the way. So there's some restriction on when you can play this card. And you probably don't want to trade 2 supply this turn for 1 supply next turn, so you probably only be playing this card during the start of a new day after it's been planned. And the whole idea here is a ramp up strategy where you can pump out very strong combos during day 2, where you can play high cost combos, whether they are 6 cost or 8 cost, when your opponent can only play the combo that's 2 costs less. Now, of course, you're paying the price for that by paying 2 of your supplies the turn before. So it's not a foolproof advantage. There's some weakness to how strong your board can be, and because Napoleon only has 20 health, I find that he struggles quite a bit against all sorts of aggro decks. And the reason why I think people think Napoleon is strong is because Empire faction and French Republic factions have some really good cards that has really good value. And I think those cards can have more effect on other Empire generals, or if they add a different faction into the Empire time period, I think they will shine there as well. So I think he's getting carried by the cards that's available to him, not necessarily his ability. Because in my eyes, logistics runs out of steam. Basically, your advantage is very short-lived. Day 2, day 3 is when you peak. And then after both of you are at 10 supplies, sure, you are capped at 12 pretty much every turn because you have access to more supplies. But you're just shifting your power to a combo turn. But your opponent, if they built their deck on curve and correctly, would actually have more board advantage than you. Or at least that's how I see it. And I rarely find myself struggling against Napoleon players in general, so that's why he's quite low on my tier list. Then moving on, we have King Priam. So King Priam exists in a very special place in the game as a 0-15 general, and that feels very weak because all the 0 attack generals so far has been 30. And the reason why he's 0-15 and still pretty competitive is because of Desperate Defense. You can give anything, any ally, +2/+2 until end of turn and stun itself. And that includes yourself. And the +2 health is more of a buffer, as in if your opponent breaks the 2 health at the start of your turn, those 2 health goes away, you still be at 15. So I use this on King Priam on turn 1, you become 2-17. If the opponent can only deal 2 damage, you bounce back to 0-15. It's as though they did no damage. So it's as if it's a heal, or at least a barrier. And it gives you 2 attack, which is actually on the strong end of generalist attack, allowing you to trade effectively as a defensive structure in the front with your general. And the longer you stall the game out, you can get your kids, Deiphobus, Troilus, Cassandra, and they're all very strong. They all recently got buffed. And Troy has some of the strongest cards in the game, in my opinion. They have some very powerful mechanics, and if you play Structure with King Priam, if you play Fall of Troy with King Priam, if you play Value with King Priam, or Fire Ship decks with Desperate Defense, or you're playing Armed Recruiters with King Priam, there's a lot of options. And you can pretty much do nothing on day 1, and just Desperate Defense, King Priam, and you will do fine. You'll almost lose no health, and there's almost no deck that can burst you down. And the biggest mistake players make with King Priam is not applying Desperate Defense on King Priam. That's what you need to do. You lose games when the enemy is able to hit you for 9 and you become last gasp. Then you're in desperation mode because you have very little health and they can burst you in 1 turn. You want to keep buffing King Priam with Desperate Defense and his win rate will go much higher. Alright, moving on, we have another 0 attack general in the 6th slot, and that is Marie Antoinette. And Marie was one of the earlier generals in the game. When I joined the beta, I think closed beta way back, she really captivated me because I felt like she was very well designed. So basically, whenever one of your allies die, I think back in those days it's only units, but now it's allies, so structures also count, your signature card will cost 1 less. Your signature card is called Revolt. So Marie Antoinette, known for her Let Them Eat Cake comment, and also the end of the French monarchy, had the French Revolution. And you have the revolutionary mob, which takes over your general and transforms them to the revolutionary mob. And you get a completely new signature card that's very powerful. And the revolutionary mob is one of the only generals so far in the game that has 2 attack. So it takes over Marie's health and gives her 2 attack. So if you can keep her healthy, you are basically a 220 general. And if you can do 80 camp, you go back to being a 220 general after you get the Revolutionary Mob. And the Revolutionary Mob have some very good abilities in that it can give 3 of your units random bonuses, whether +1 attack, whether splash, or short range. And those can stack. So you can eventually get a short range splash unit with extra attack. That's pretty amazing. And you spawn extra peasants each turn, and there are tons of peasantry focused cards that combo well, and there's a lot that got buffed, whether Rabble Rouser got increased attack points, you get 2 of them every Daybreak, very powerful. Daybreak effects work very well with her. You also have Guillotine that does Daybreak damage from a structure based on how many peasantry you have, and you pretty much swarm the enemy till death. And that makes Marie decks very, very powerful. Now, of course, there are some counters out there for her, namely Seren, which will feast off your early game allies that you have to get killed, and that will probably ruin your day. But aside from that one counter, I think Marie Antoinette decks are highly competitive, and it's pretty strong, as you'll take the 6th spot here. Then moving on, we have Pentathlea. She's our Trojan general, and she represents the Amazons, and she's a mid-range general, and definitely that fits her, as her signature card is the highest costing in the game, not counting Revolutionary Mob, because Revolt does cost 9, but it will go down. Blood Oath costs 5, and it will always cost 5 because it is ridiculously strong. Give a target friendly unit Shatter, redeploy this unit with 1 health. This combos insanely well with many cards, whether they are cards with already great Shatter effect or great Herald effect, because what happens is, if let's say you have a strong Shatter effect card, Mycenaean Chariot, that will spawn 2 archers when it dies. Apply this to it, it stacks. When it dies, it not only spawn 2 archers, it also spawn another Mycenaean Chariot, which once it dies will spawn another 2 archers. And if the enemy can't clear your 1 health Mycenaean Chariot on their turn, you can apply Blood Oath repeatedly. You can apply Blood Oath twice if you want, and they'll spawn 2 of the units. So it's an unending value train. If you have a fast unit that can deal damage right away when it's played, you play Blood Oath on it as part of the combo. Let's say you have a War Dog, 3-2 with stun. Punch the enemy in the face, stun one of their high damage, high value units. It dies, but it's spawned at 3-1. You can punch the general again and deal 6 damage with the card and stun 2 very important targets. You can apply this to camouflage units and then they become undying. So imagine 4-2 camouflage. You play it out, no one can touch you unless they have AoE clears, and then you apply Blood Oath next turn on curve, and then you have a 4-1 camouflage unit forever. Unless the enemy have Blood of the Sun, but that's not preventable. And if you have a good Herald ability, when you redeploy this unit with 1 health, that triggers the Herald ability. So Blood Oath is very, very strong, and that gives a lot of strength to Pentathlea, who also have a pretty good unique ability in that the first unit you deploy on each day will gain 1 attack. It's not a huge bonus, but it's nice to have and gives her a lot of aggro ability, because on the first play, you can have a 2-1 slinger with fast that gives you at least 4 damage on the enemy general, or you can get a 2-3 horse scout for 1. That's insane value. And there's a lot of insane value cards within the Trojan faction. Greek Militia, pay 2, get a 3-2 and a 2-2. That's pretty insane too. So tons of good cards to combo with her passive, and Blood Oath is obviously very strong. Obviously the balance here is that it costs 5, which is holding her back. If it costed any less, she will skyrocket to the top of the charts. Then moving on, we have Seren, who has received buff after being stuck probably on the low end of things. Now, her ability is that whenever she kills anything on her turn, she can spawn the Swin Attendant, which as of the current patch is a 2-2-2 action unit. And the 2 actions is key, and 2-2 is also key. It used to be 1-3, because 2-2 means you can trade into enemy generals for 4 damage. And that's huge. And basically Seren thrives off of killing enemy units or structures on her turn using her draw bow, which switches to draw blade. Draw bow gives her short range, allowing her to pick off targets without trading health herself or picking off enemies on the back line. And then draw blade gives you 1 extra attack. You still have melee, so you can burst 2 health. And basically anytime you kill anything, you get access to a new Swin Attendant. And that is very powerful and very strong against the likes of Marie Antoinette, which wants to have things get killed. In this case, you kill them and you spawn them. Now, she does struggle against certain matchup. Control decks that don't use a lot of units leaves her completely useless, right? Her abilities and her signature card are both directed at killing things. And if your opponent can beat you with just event cards or late game combos of giant sized units, then you're out of luck. So you do have some weakness there. And if you're up against a Seren deck, consider ways to beat her without playing early game units, as those early game units are just going to help her out. So during your first reserve day draw, pick things that are not low health units, as that will just help your enemy win. Then as we move into top 3, we have Lagatha, and this one's going to be a bit controversial as well. So Lagatha is probably the most played general in the game. She is one of the beginner 3, and she is given for free to everyone. She's very competitive and very easy to play because she is an aggro playstyle. Pretty much you go face, and your general herself is insanely strong because you get +1 attack anytime you empty out your hand, and your signature card is First Strike, which allows you to ping damage on anything you want at all time. Both of these are very strong mechanics, and she counters a lot of late game decks that rely on heal, because even if you reset the heal with AD Camp, Lagatha herself will retain her attack. So when you're almost dead and you heal both generals, Lagatha goes to a 520 general, and you can't deal with that, because if you can't deal with a 120, you're not going to be able to deal with a 520. But she does have a ton of weaknesses, in my opinion. I think almost all Ancient Era faction decks, with the access of cards they have, namely a lot of stuns, out of position, trample, war dog, that's 3 cards you can take every day to counter Lagatha. And what you do is you just keep stunning Lagatha. Doesn't matter how strong she becomes or how often she empties out her hand, if she can't get an attack on you, it's all for naught. And she will die because she only has 20 health. It's quite simple. Because Lagatha decks suffer from one key weakness. It runs out of steam when you empty your hand every turn. If you don't burst down your enemy by day 2 or early day 3, you're not going to win the game. Because if the enemy have stuns, you can't attack with your mighty Lagatha. Doesn't matter if she's 20-20 or 120. If you can't attack because you're stunned, it's game over. So that's how you counter her. And because this counter is not hard to do, you can have many decks that actually counter her. And those cards that I named, Trample, War Dog, Out of Position, are high value cards in their own right that you would want to include in your decks anyways, regardless you're faced against a Lagatha or not. So it's not like you have to tech those cards into those decks just for Lagatha decks. So I think she suffers quite a bit from 6 of the 11 generals in the game. Therefore, she can't really crack the top 2. Now, who are in the top 2? Well, on the second spot, we have Cao Cao. So Cao Cao has received quite a few nerfs since the game was launched and since I played the closed beta. Manipulate is now 4 cost, quite high. Used to be 2 cost. Can you believe that? You can draw a card for 2, and it goes down by 1 anytime you target anything with a played card. And even at 4, it's extremely viable and extremely strong, because when you play a card game, the worst thing that can happen to you is when you run out of options. And you run out of options when you don't have cards in the hand. So having a card advantage is very good, and being able to draw a card any turn, every single turn, is quite powerful. And you can also synergize it a little bit by reducing the cost, so you can play with your supply curve, and you can also dictate things like the Tun Tian structure that can spawn extra short sword for high value by setting up your manipulate to finish up your supply. Very powerful. And the other nerf that he received is that he went down from 25 health to 22 health. And this is still not strong enough of a nerf in my opinion, because he's the only general in the game that has consistent healing built on the general himself. As in, any turn, if you had an ally that had moved forward, means backline to frontline, Cao Cao will heal 1 health. And this is very passive, happens every turn. If you're playing movement decks, if you have an open field on the map, then anything you want to play on the front line, you play on the back line, it gets bounced to the front line, and that's 1 health for you. Now, you can only heal up to 1 health a turn, right? If you have 10 things that moved up, I don't know how, but let's say you do, you don't heal 10, you heal 1. But that's a lot of effective health. So think about it as 1 health a turn. And if you're playing up against a Cao Cao deck, then let's say the game goes from turn 1 to day 3. That's 7 turns at least for Cao Cao. So his effective health is around 29, and the game drags on. He's going to have higher effective health. He always heals. Doesn't matter if you last gas him, the ability still stays. So if you have him to 6 health, he gets pop. Next turn, he moves up. 7 health, 8 health, 9 health, 10 health, while your general can't do anything about that. So that gives him a pretty unique advantage, and also trains you to think about movement. And Three Kingdom cards and Ancient cards have a lot of movement aspect to them that can be taken advantage by Cao Cao. And many of the strong decks that Cao Cao plays revolves around movement. And he's very flexible, tons of decks that can be played by him. Of course, some of them are going to be stronger than others. But all things combined, I think Cao Cao is an excellent general in the game. And these two big nerfs kind of reflect that as well. Because many of the generals that are on top of our list have received multiple nerfs in the past. Then on the top of the list, I'm a little biased here I guess, is Agamemnon, King of Kings. And his unique ability is that anytime another ally is deployed on an empty line, he gains short ranged. And his signature card is a 0-cost card that moves your general. So moving your general obviously just saves you an action and can set up lines that are empty. That's the whole point of Agamemnon. And this can be comboed quite well with multiple cards, namely Campfire, as if you move next to a campfire, you heal 2. And Agamemnon gets free moves every single turn. So if you build a deck where you take campfires every day, you have access to almost free healing every single day. So once again, it's another situation where there's a lack of healing in the game. And since 80 can't heal both generals, it's not the best heal in the game. So if you have a general that have some sort of consistent healing, whether you're playing as Cao Cao with the passive moving, or Agamemnon here, which also involves a little bit of moving, but Campfire card as well, you can heal quite a lot of health, making the generals that are fighting against you in a very tough situation. Now, aside from that, having short range whenever allies played on empty line, it's very powerful because it allows you to trade in the early game with the enemy health without losing your own health, and it also allows you to have access to the enemy backline in the early game without playing a short range or actually a long range unit, because you're now a mobile short range unit. So imagine if you have your slinger or archer with a free move every turn. So you can move up, shoot something in the back, and then move back into safety, or transform during the end turn into a melee unit that can trade back. So he's not going to stay short range during the end turn. I actually think that might be the nerf to do him in if he becomes too strong. I think not many players are using him that much, and his win rate's not eye-catching enough like Guthrum did to deserve a huge nerf. But I think a good nerf for him is if he was in short range on his own turn, he stays short range on the opponent's turn, allowing the opponent to trade into him for free. Right now it just says this gains short range this turn. It should say this gains short range until next turn. That exposes him quite a bit. Right now he's kind of like the Trojan Wall, where you have the best of both worlds. You're a mobile Trojan Wall. You move up, hit the enemy, and then you stay there, become melee. Very, very powerful. Or you can hide by moving back, regardless. And he also got something that can buff him, as in you get the Ritual Sacrifice card that you can transfer the attack from one of your unit onto yourself, and then you can apply that damage through short range to anything you want, which is utterly ridiculous. Because think about it this way: if the enemy general, let's say it's been a long fight, they have access to AD camp, you pop their last gasp, but they heal back up, and they're at 15, 16 health, feeling pretty good about themselves. Well, guess what? You have access to heroic cards like the Minotaur that can deal 7 damage to face and have high enough health to survive the trade against enemy generals. So if the enemy general, let's say, have 15 health, you hit them on the empty board, you're on the back. Minotaur played on the front, heroic becomes 7 attack, punches the enemy general. They go down to 8 health. Your Minotaur is alive. You play Ritual Sacrifice. You kill off your own Minotaur, transfer the 7 attack onto Agamemnon. So Agamemnon becomes 8 attack. And short range, because you played the Minotaur heroic on the front, you move him up, snipe the enemy general for another 8 damage. 15 damage in one turn. That's ridiculous. And you take nothing back because you're not even trading it through melee. You're hitting it with short range. So Agamemnon is really quite strong. And I think he deserves the number 1 spot, at least on my list. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this, and I can't wait to see who is the new general added next week. And we'll definitely do another Theorycraft Thursday about the new general and some of the strategy that we can think up about him. So until next time, bye!